So obviously the last 3.5 months, a lot has changed. But then some things haven't changed. So just to go through it really quick, we're experiencing the worst pandemic that we have in over 100 years. The ensuing economic fallout has been disastrous for poor and working class Americans and people around the world. The situation was perilous before all of this happened. However, the current wave of protests and uprisings have injected some sense of hope into the population at large, as we just talked about. So what's your take on the current situation? Do you see any historical parallels? And is there anything about the current situation that you find unique?
It's quite different than anything I remember since early childhood. I grew up in the Depression and the rise of labor militancy in the early 30s when I was a kid. My family was mostly all, in fact, first generation immigrants, factory workers, unemployed seamstresses, and so on. And the feeling of excitement as the labor movement had been crushed in the 20s by Woodrow Wilson, mainly, really gone, but it was starting to revive. CIO organizing militant strikes, Communist Party, Socialist Party, a lot of activism, and there was a sense of, it was much poorer than today, much harsher than now, objectively, but there was a real sense we're going to do something. There was a relatively sympathetic administration, like now, and so there was interaction and a real sense we're somehow going to get out of this together. We don't know how exactly, but we're going to struggle on. I haven't seen anything like that since then. As I just mentioned, in the early days of the civil rights movement, there was a lot of support, but very specific support. There was support if you're going after racist Alabama sheriffs, but don't touch us. That became very clear as soon as King began to shift his activities to the north. He was dead, nothing more. But even in the early civil rights movement, with all the enthusiasm, it was pretty thin. I just mentioned to you, I was looking at polls recently. David Sirota, great activist, published a lot of early 60s polls, and it's quite striking to see how much opposition there was to the civil rights movement, even at the peak of enthusiasm for it. I have a dream and all that. Totally different now. I mean, things like 2/3 support, public support for Black Lives Matter, for the demonstrations, high military officers supporting the demonstrations. I've never seen anything like that. It's a real opportunity. And I think you're right that it combines with the hammer blow of the pandemic. And of course, there's something that nobody's talking about that is much worse. We're facing a catastrophic environmental crisis. Trump is racing towards it with dedication. If we don't stop that, everything else is moot. There won't be anything else to talk about. But all this is converging. In addition to this, Trump is very carefully and consciously trying to destroy the fundamental formal structure of the democratic system. I mean, the purge of the executive, along with Mitch McConnell's silencing of the Senate, that's really something. Nothing like that has happened in 350 years of parliamentary history. You take a look at the British Constitution. It's about a dozen words. It's based 350 years are based on good faith and trust. Pretty much the same here. There's a written constitution, but it doesn't deal with particular contingencies. Like it doesn't prevent Trump from calling martial law if he feels like it, or firing the whole top military command. I mean, these things don't happen because people have some sense of good faith and trust. So when Nixon couldn't handle it any longer, He didn't call out the army. He left. It was kind of like a human being. This guy can't expect that. And so, for example, things like the purge of the inspectors general, it's an amazing act. Here are these guys who were put in by conservative Republicans, Charles Grassley mainly, his life's work, to supervise the departments to make sure there's no extreme corruption, other malfeasance. Trump, they start looking into Trump's swamp, out, all of them. Not a peep from the Republican Party. And he went out of his way to humiliate Grassley, just like an ordinary tin pot dictator. This is 89-year-old senior Republican, respected. He just smacked him in the face. Grassley could write a letter. Nobody backed him up. I mean, this is only one act. I mean, anything that happens. So like the scientist in charge of vaccine production, pretty important now. He said something about Trump's quack medicines. Out. One Republican senator, Lisa Murkowski, said she's having some doubts about things. Came down like a ton of bricks. Just a petty dictator. People call him fascist. I don't agree. He doesn't understand what fascism is. He's just a tin pot dictator from some semi-colony trying to destroy the country, to destroy the world, in fact. There's never been anything like this. On the other hand, we have these protests. Never been anything like it. This could lead to pretty serious crisis. There is a constitutional crisis in the background in the United States, which is unavoidable for just structural reasons. A small minority of the population, rural, traditional Christian, white, conservative, small minority, maybe 20% could run the government because of the radically undemocratic Senate, the way in which urban votes are concentrated, other things. And there's no way to avoid it. A constitutional amendment is impossible. Small states will block it. So we're really heading to a major constitutional crisis, and Trump is escalating. So we have all these things converging. First of all, he's dismantling the arms control system, increasing the threat of nuclear war, environmental catastrophe, destruction of democracy, pandemic, racist police actions. It's all converging at once in an astonishing moment. I mean, what will come out of this, you can see on the streets much better than I can. But it's certainly amazing.
But you see, in the short term, we would agree that it makes the most strategic sense to get Trump and as many Republicans out of office in the short term. That this isn't a long-term plan, but that the short-term electoral approach should be for people to strategically vote to get as many Republicans and Trump out of office.
I mean, that's a matter of survival of organized human society. Everything else pales in consequence. It's kind of interesting about voting. There's a kind of an establishment principle about voting. It says politics consists in showing up every 4 years, all excited, and doing your democratic duty, then go home and let your betters run things. That's the standard view. There's a left position which seems to have been forgotten. Politics consists of constant activism. Every once in a while, there's this thing called an election. Okay, you take off a couple minutes, you see if there's a difference between the candidates. If there is, you vote against the worst one. You don't vote for anyone because they're all pretty awful. So you vote against the worst one, then you start up the work again. That seems a bit forgotten. The left is consumed by immersion in the establishment position. What should we do in the election? This, that, the other. It's obvious what to do in the election. You take 5 minutes and you try to save the country, the world from destruction. then go back to work. And we shouldn't even be talking about it. But it's the big issue on the left. It's a very strange submission to establishment ideology. All of this should take 5 minutes. Then you go back to work. And the activism has been effective. I mean, take a look at Biden's electoral program. It's way to the left of any Democrat since FDR. Not because that's what he decided he wanted, just because activists are pounding on the doors. I think Sanders is doing just the right thing. You know, he's in there. He's got his guys on the commissions, on the planning commissions. They're, you know, the activists are pressing hard, and the program shifted to the left. Okay, that's what you keep doing. Meanwhile, keep organizing all the way up and down. I mean, Obama, for example, I suppose just out of personal arrogance, basically destroyed the party. Nothing happened at local levels, state levels. The Republicans understood. They took over school boards, state legislatures,
Yep.
it all up. That's what activists have to do. The Greens have missed out on this. They mostly show up every 4 years. That's not the way to build a movement.
Yeah. And we've seen that here in Indiana. Back in 2008, Noam, we had the first time Indiana went blue in 44 years was in 2008. We haven't went blue since then in a presidential election. That entire infrastructure was dismantled after 2008. And then, of course, on the heels of that, we have the Tea Party, Citizens United, gerrymandering. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a bit, but we worked very hard on the Bernie campaign, not only because we wanted Sanders in the White House, but we saw this as an opportunity to connect with people, ordinary Americans who don't self-identify as progressives or leftists, who are getting involved with the political process for the first time. Now, you can kind of tell me if you think we were naive or not, but we thought at the time that this perhaps was the last chance for us to get someone elected through the Democratic Party to potentially reform the party, to the extent that you want to spend time on electoral politics, for people to really push. Of course, after South Carolina, right on the heels of South Carolina, we have the pandemic and then everything that's followed. One of the questions all of the serious organizers that I know have been asking is, what is this vehicle for change? That, yes, we have NGOs, many of whom are not very useful, but there are some who are useful. Labor unions seem to have been the traditional vehicle for this kind of change. We see an upsurge in labor organizing. Groups like the DSA and the United Electrical Workers are doing workplace organizing as we speak. In fact, the people we have inside of the DSA that we know said that there's actually more requests for workplace organizing than they can fulfill, which is both good and bad. I think a lot of us are asking today, what is that sort of organizational vehicle that we could use? Is it labor unions? Is it community organizations? Is it a new party? Is it the existing? That's okay.
Working at home.
You know, maybe he was answering. He was answering the question. I think he was trying to tell us which vehicle was for change.
There's another point to make about labor organizing.
Mm-hmm.
Take the teacher strikes.
Yeah.
It's pretty astonishing. West Virginia, Arizona, no unions, conservative, what's called conservative, but I think it's not right below the surface. These guys got enormous support, public support all over the place. They're not just calling for better wages, they're calling for doing something about the schools.
Yep.
I mean, in the whole neoliberal period, one of the top planks has been to destroy public education. So it's defunded, too many kids in a class, no counselors, nothing. Put it all in the private sector. So these teachers are fighting back and say, we want a vigorous, functioning educational system. Breaking into the legislature, getting some results. And that goes back to your point, what you said may be naive. I don't think it's naive, of trying to reach people who don't call themselves progressives. These people don't, but they are. It's just, differently formulated. And as soon as they start pressing for more communities control, teachers control, better schools, so on, they got the whole community behind them. I'm in Tucson. You can see it in a lot of things. I mean, when I moved here from Boston, I thought it's going to be politically dead. It's the opposite. I think it's more politically alive than Boston. All kinds of things. I mean, we're not far from Mexico. So, almost half the population is Mexican American. There's volunteers who go into the desert to leave bottles of water for refugees. They come up for federal trial. They're exonerated by the jury, local people. No, it's not a crime to leave water bottles for migrants. Doesn't sound like. I mean, you also have the gated communities where they're raising money to build a private wall to save us from the rapists and so on. But you have both. And you have signs on people's lawns all over saying that humanitarian aid is not a crime. These are not people you'd call progressive, but they really are. I think most people are. It's just right below the surface. It has to be brought out. So I think it's not naive at all. And I think you're right that the extravaganza does give an opportunity to go out and talk to people, meet them, get them together, get them to organize communities, workplaces, and cooperatives, all sorts of things. And I don't know if you're in the areas where this Next Systems project is working, Carl Purvitz's work around, not around there.
No.
Well, in parts of mostly parts of the Rust Belt around Cleveland and so on, Youngstown, there's Igor has been working on, it's really important, trying to set up, after the bankers in New York and Chicago sent the industries abroad, started up with small enterprises, worker-owned enterprises that link themselves to the service economy that's developing. So like Cleveland, it's, hospitals, educational institutions, and so on. They need things like laundries. So there's a worker-owned laundry enterprise that serves them. There's quite a proliferation of these. I think it's called the Next Systems Project. You might want to look into it.
I will. One of the things I was thinking as you were speaking is there seems to be, I get very frustrated when I hear people on the left talk about how, Americans are dumb or these people are dumb or what. I mean, we're in the streets constantly. We live in a Rust Belt town that's just plagued by systemic poverty, segregation, opioid addiction. We've got a maximum security prison. We've got a minimum security prison. We've got a coal-fired power plant. One of our top sources of revenue is a casino, which is closed right now because of the pandemic. So we're just losing money like crazy as a city. It's as bad as it gets. The only places I could think that would be worse are places like Gary, Indiana, Immokalee, Florida, or maybe some native reservations. The situation here is about as intense as it can get. Yet most of the people we speak with on the streets fully understand that the system is corrupt to the bone. They don't buy into it. They don't buy into a lot of the nationalism. They don't buy into a lot of the stuff. But there is a sense that maybe nothing can be done about it. So our step to do something, obviously, is to get them organized, to get them thinking about collectivity, that they're not just in this on their own. If they lose their house or they lose their job, it's just them and their family, and they have to figure it out. I think one of the steps is to empower, get people organized, and get them to understand that they will have power if they organize collectively. But a conversation that I consistently have with our friend Michael Albert is that sometimes runs into a barrier, because at some point people do want to know or develop what is it that we actually want, and beyond maybe something like we can get people to agree Medicare for all. We can get a lot of people to agree on the Green New Deal. But I think what would surprise some people on the left is the degree to which many poor and working class people even have more sophisticated questions like, if we implement the Green New Deal, who gets to call the shots? Who gets to make these decisions? What do you think about that? Is that something that you've noticed over the years as well?
The time. In fact, one of the things I've constantly pushed is to get people to ask, uh, what's good about having a job? Take having a job. That means being under the totalitarian control of a master almost every waking hour at a level that Stalin couldn't have conceived of. Stalin didn't say you can go to the bathroom at 3 o'clock for 5 minutes, or you have to wear this clothes, not that other clothes, or you can't stop to talk to your friend. That's having a job. What's so great about that? Why should we even be tolerated? In fact, let's look a little bit about working class history. In the 19th century, the workers bitterly condemned this. I mean, it was so overwhelmingly condemned that the Republican Party condemned it. Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party, one of its slogans was that wage labor is the same as slavery, except that it's temporary until you become a free person again. Why can't we go back to the mentality of the 19th century workers? In fact, for 2,000 years, back to classical Greece, the idea that you'd be dependent on another person was the ultimate abysmal situation. Of course, they thought it was fine for slaves and women, but we're beyond that, I hope. But why should anybody be dependent? And I think this strikes a chord. Why should we? Why shouldn't? In fact, in the early 30s, going back to my memories, one of the things that really excited people was the sit down strikes. A sit down strike is one step before saying, we don't need you guys. We'll take the factory over and run it ourselves better than you can. I think that's, we've come very close to that. So, for example, take 2008, 2009. Obama essentially nationalized the auto industry. There were a couple of paths. And one of them is give it back to the former owners, let them build stuff that's destroying us, more cars and so on. Sure, that's the one they took. There was another, give it over to the workforce. With the subsidies you're giving the financial industry, financial institutions, support them to do something we need, like mass public transportation. I think that could have been done if there was public awareness about the issues. Uh, you see it on a small scale, so I'm sure you've seen this where you are, but I was in Boston. So the small town outside of Boston, Taunton, a couple of years ago, where there was some enterprise, pretty profitable, that was building sophisticated parts for airplanes. The multinational who owned it decided it wasn't making enough profit, so they canned it. The union, which was I think it might have been an electrical workers union, said, okay, we'll buy it from you. We'll just buy the plant. We'll take it over. It's kind of interesting what happened. For the multinational, that would have been profitable, but they didn't allow it for class reasons. They're not stupid. They don't want these ideas to get around. So they're willing to take the loss to keep the workers from buying it. Now, if there had been any community support, they could have won. But Boston's a pretty activist community, no support. I think that's a barrier we have to overcome. There are a lot of cases like this. I've seen quite a few of them. And it's very interesting to see the class consciousness of the ruling class. They understand. They'd rather lose money than have the idea of self ownership take root. And I think they understand it's not very far. Actually, I don't know if you followed the Davos conference last January, but it was pretty interesting. This January affair where all the rich guys get together and go skiing and so on. This year was different. there was a theme that ran through it saying, we got to watch out. There's what they call reputational risk. The guys are coming after us. So they put out a statement about how we realize we've done bad things in the past. We weren't paying enough attention to the public. We were too greedy. Now we've learned our lesson. We're going to be good citizens. You can trust us, etc., etc. They're scared. They know it. I mean, there's a memo leaked from J.P. Morgan Chase recently, warning that they ought to stop funding fossil fuels because people are turning against them. They're going to get into trouble. We have to, all of that are signs that the pressure and the activism are working. Everything from teacher strikes to, multinationals. And I think it's a moment when that could be brought together, organized. I think Mike is right. You want to have some picture of the future. My feeling is, we've argued about this for years. I think the details that they go into, I think, are too much. We can give guidelines, basic ideas. Things have to be worked out by themselves. I mean, here actually, I kind of agree with Marx, who never, I think he went too far. He never said anything about post-capitalist society. But the idea was when working people are free from capitalist shackles, they'll figure it out for themselves. And you have to experiment. We don't know enough. We don't have all the answers. We don't know whether this is going to work or that's going to work. You have to try it out. But the basic ideas, I think, are clear. And people ought to direct control their own lives, their own institutions. Shouldn't be any hierarchies. There shouldn't be any bosses from anywhere. It should be like the populist movement in the late 19th century. That was real populism, most radical democratic movement in American history. And farmers from Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, who decided we don't want to have to borrow money from rich bankers in Boston at usurious interest rates and have them market our crops. We'll do it ourselves. We'll set up our own banks, our own marketing system, and we'll run it all ourselves. I mean, they were crushed by force, but it was a major movement. That's mainstream America. As much as you can't get more mainstream than that. And my feeling is that's just below the surface everywhere. It's what you described is, I think, true. People just feel it's hopeless. Can't fight City Hall, but you can. And I mean, this is 100 times better than I do. Just get some small victory. Maybe get some mothers together and get a traffic light where the kids go to school. Okay, we can do something. Yep. Let's go on to the next.
Yep.
And we can take the whole thing. Yep. The whole system of control is very fragile. Depends on people's subordination. If they withdraw that consent, it's over. Like the sit-down strikes or the auto industry in 2008. It's just on the verge of big changes.
Have you been surprised at, speaking of class consciousness, and I want to get back to I think where poor and working class people are coming from, what we're seeing on the ground and what we're experiencing. Have you been surprised at the state's inability to respond in the short term to the financial distress people are under? In other words, I was somewhat surprised that the state wouldn't step in and at least give people even menial coverage, like COVID-19 coverage is taken care of, and maybe we'll give you a couple grand a month for the next 6 months. Michael Albert's point is maybe along the lines of what you're saying, which is the rich are so class conscious that they didn't even want people to get a taste of what it would be like to perhaps get a couple grand a month from the government. Or
dangerous.
Yeah,
it's dangerous. If you get the sense that the state can do something for you, that it could be your government, not their government, that can go on. It's the domino theory, basically. Same in international relations. Now, why do you have to destroy Grenada if they have local control over fishing? Can't tolerate it. In fact, the weaker the country, the more dangerous it is. So you have to go after, Laos, Grenada, any small place. It's kind of like the mafia. Like if some small grocery store says, I'm not going to pay protection money, the Godfather doesn't need the money, but he's going to send in his goons to beat the shit out of them, because you can't let people get the idea you can do something for yourself. And I think we have a very class conscious business class. They take every opportunity to make sure that nobody gets the wrong ideas. So yes, what's going on with the stimulus bill is just shocking. And the Democrats are in with it. I mean, there's supposed to be a supervisor for the CARES program. I think it's a couple hundred days now. Nobody's appointed. Of course, Mitch McConnell's not going to let anything go through the Senate, but the Democrats could do it themselves. Pelosi, Schumer, they're just not doing it. Okay, so, Mnuchin will supervise it. You know where that's going to go, exactly where we see it. But so yes, they're very class conscious. I think he's right. You see it all the time. That's why, I mean, they would save money if you had universal health care. They would save money. It's costly for them. We don't want it. We'd rather lose the money and have it all privatized. Don't have people get the idea you can get together and do something for yourself.
Is this the same concept pertaining to prisons as well? In other words, there's a lot of folks. We're dealing with a horrific situation at our local prison that's become a COVID hotbed in the state. It's horrific conditions for the people who are inside. We just spoke with an inmate yesterday on the phone from inside the prison. The conditions are worse than the Iraqi prisoners that we had in Iraq. There's a sense among the activists who are out there fighting against these conditions and fighting for those prisoners that this is all about profit. But the reality is that a very small percentage of prisons in the United States are actually privatized. So there are these other functions, these sort of disciplinary functions that the state, does to people and in the service of people who are in power. This isn't necessarily that important, but I'm just interested to see, why do you think that is that we no longer talk about those sort of like functions that the state and that the rich elites do that aren't necessarily just to make themselves money, but to keep people in line?
Same lack of consciousness as the other things we're talking about. I mean, there's a lot of left activism, but it's kind of focused on specific things, doesn't look at the roots of the problem. So take, say, the pandemic. There's been almost no discussion of what the roots of it are. And the roots of it are transparent. It's a capitalist catastrophe. I mean, it was known in 2003, perfectly well known after SARS, that there's another pandemic coming, probably coronavirus. Scientists knew what to do about it. Drug companies wouldn't do anything. Straight capitalist logic, no profit in preparing for a catastrophe 10 years from now. So we'll do what we make money on tomorrow. Government could step in principle. That's blocked by neoliberalism, which says government's not allowed to do anything, have to hand it over to private power. So they're out. So nothing was done. I mean, there's a lot more, which is worse, but made it worse. But that's the core of it. And that's replicating itself right now. There's going to be another pandemic, be worse than this one. We know what has to be done about it. Drug companies won't do it. The government won't do it. So let it come. Almost no discussion of this. And it's not quantum physics. It's right in front of your eyes, like most things are. It's in front of your eyes that a job is pure totalitarianism, but people want to get a job. What alternative is there? I think if you think about it for 30 seconds, it's crazy. Why should we be bossed around by some guy all of our waking hours? That's life.
How about the class relations within the left? I'll tell you, as someone who grew up as a son of an iron worker, my mom worked part-time jobs. I grew up with a good class consciousness, good union politics, strong union politics. Didn't know much about gender or sexuality or race politics. Those were things I learned as I got older, went to university, got involved with different left movements. And over the years, I've seen LGBTQ activists, I think, get more of a position within the left. I've seen Black activists and scholars have more of a position within these left institutions. It seems to me that class is still a major barrier, that many of the left institutions, conferences that I've been to, protests, events I've been asked to speak at, I'll often afterwards try and speak with some of the people who are there, many of them very nice people with good intentions, but whose day-to-day reality is starkly different than what I've experienced since I came home from the Marine Corps and my life before the Marine Corps. What do you think we can do, and how do you think the left would change if we sort of overcome this class barrier? And do you see that as a barrier, or is this something that I'm just reading too much into?
Look, I don't live the life of a factory worker, okay? In fact, I don't live the life of the guy who fixes the motor in my car. But doesn't mean you can't be equals working together for similar things, each producing what you can do. I mean, perfectly possible. So, for example, at an earlier period, early 30s again, it was mainly the Communist Party, but left intellectuals in the Communist Party just regarded it as part of their life to be involved in worker education programs. I mean, sure, that's what you do. My own family were kind of like your background, working class. A lot of them barely went to school, never got past fourth grade. Very educated people. They went to these classes. It was mostly through the unions. Went to concerts. Went to Shakespeare plays that were put on by WPA actors in Central Park. It's just part of their life. It was the same in the 19th century. An illiterate Irish blacksmith in Boston, if he had a little extra money, would pay a boy to read to him things that we now regard as classics, the English literature of the day. I mean, that can be part of every person's life, and they can contribute to it. They can be writers. They can be, take, say, blues and jazz. It came from the most repressed, viciously repressed sectors that had ever appeared in the world. It was the source of some of the most creative music. It's the seeds are there everywhere.
On this point, we opened this community center in 2017, and the reason we opened this community center, there's multiple reasons. One is that we've seen that too much of the activism has been online, and there's ability to mobilize. So Sergio and I came back from Standing Rock. We traveled there with different organizations like Veterans for Peace and other groups that were involved. We went there with largely a contingent of veterans. When we got to Standing Rock, it was amazing to us that there were thousands of veterans from across the country. But what we found was that virtually none of them were members of organizations, and that when they were going home to virtually nothing in terms of an organizing infrastructure. So when we came back from Standing Rock on the heels of Donald Trump's victory, it became clear to us that one of the things that's needed is a space that's open 7 days a week, that people can come to socialize, to not just, we hold organizing events, workshops, campaigns, organizing meetings to actually do actions. But we also have barbecues. We watch boxing matches. We have people come. We do the kind of things that I think we need to do to build the kind of bonds and trust that you need in order to engage in serious political work. So in other words, there's people at Standing Rock saying, "Hey, brother, are you ready to die with me?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't even know your last name. Maybe we should take a step back, and build the kind of infrastructure and foundation that's needed." Can you talk a little bit about the vibrant culture that you did grow up in, and the importance of spaces like this to make this a regular part of people's lives?
very much what you're describing. So it takes two of my aunts were seamstresses. They worked, of course, they were unemployed then, but they worked. These were horrible conditions. You know about them, but they were members of the International Labor Garment Workers Union, Ladies Garment Workers Union. There was a union hall. There were political parties, a lot of it the Communist Party. They had exactly what you described, not just workers' education, but parties, concerts. They got a week in the Catskill Mountains to be off under the Union. It was just their lives. It was a very enriching life. And it was, you talk about a space, it was the Union Hall. In fact, I noticed that when I travel around the world, just about every country in the world, when I give talks, it's often in the Union Hall. Canada, England, Mexico, anywhere. Not here. You can't give a talk in a Union Hall here. Thatcher and Reagan, or whoever was giving them their instructions, knew what they were doing. First act, destroy the unions. Thatcher, there's no society. Make sure that people are atomized, separated. No union halls, no place for people to get together. You're all on your own in the market. That's right. Actually, Marx talked about it when he was condemning the autocratic rulers of the mid 19th century. He said they want to turn the population into a sack of potatoes, people who are atomized, separated from one another, alone, nowhere to get together, no space. Even the boulevards in Paris, when they were rebuilt, were designed so that people couldn't get together. University architecture since the 60s has been designed. This is almost all over the world. So there aren't any open spaces. There's a way to get from here to there, but no sprawl plaza. We don't want people to get together. That's dangerous. So I think you have your finger right on the basic problem. We should reestablish spaces where people live. Maybe card games, parties, barbecues, educational centers, meetings to organize the tactics for tomorrow, all of these things. That's the center of your life. And that's where the domino theory comes in. That spreads. If we can organize this part of our lives, we can take over the rest of it too. And why not just take over the factories and the enterprises? And why not just get rid of the hedge funds and private equity funds? We don't want that garbage. Get rid of the financial institutions. They're just predatory. They don't do anything. Set up a community bank. Do postal. One important thing, very important, is to try to save the post office.
Yep.
These class-conscious gangsters want to destroy it. The post, not just because it doesn't give them profit. The post office is a community service. It's a place where people get together and talk to each other. You get to know your letter carrier. If you're sick, they'll bring you a sandwich or something. It's just a community operation, and it's people running something for themselves, which works, which is effective, very efficient. Wrong idea. We don't want to have people have that idea. That is another point that could be revived. It's forgotten, beaten out of people's heads. Why do we have a post office? Well, you go back to the 1780s. Why is it in the Constitution? Because it was that was the way the founders interpreted the First Amendment. The post office was a subsidy to the press. Almost everything that went through the post office was cheap distribution of an independent press. It's a subsidy to ensure that we have a lively, free press. Last thing these guys want. They don't want you to hear about that. The United States the business class is so class conscious, we don't even have public radio and television like they have everywhere.
Right.
You don't have, everywhere else in the world, I can be on a discussion program on mainstream television. I'm here, maybe you get 3 seconds between two commercials. We want to make sure that nothing is done that lets people believe you can do things for yourself. It's a concerted program. We have to understand it, and we have to fight against it at the root. And so take the post office again. I mean, that could be used for banking. Instead of going to, Chase Manhattan, what you do is go to the local post office where they can handle small deposits, no bureaucracy, no conditions, no usury. You just put your money and you get it back. It funds the local store or something. All of that's possible. Of course, voting by mail is also possible. Get around the gerrymandering and the voter suppression. So the post office itself, just one thing, but it can be a basis for development. The same with everything else. I mean, take, say, universal health care. I mean, if people are brought to see what it is, they're appalled. So, for example, the U.S. does have universal health care. We have it. It's called emergency rooms. You can drag yourself to an emergency room. They'll take care of you. You just go to an emergency room. You see what it's like.
Or the Veterans Administration hospital. I don't mean to cut you off, Noam, but I mean even the VA. I mean, we use the VA as a model, as flawed as it is. My friends who have private insurance, when I tell them about my experiences going to the VA, showing them my veterans card, no bills, no paperwork, getting my care, and going home, it blows their mind.
And before it was defunded, it was a very efficient organization.
Yep.
Had better medical care than the regular hospitals. Actually, I have a friend who happened to be in the Air Force ROTC, never even in combat, but he had a very bad fall. He was totally paralyzed, literally. He could barely move his eyebrows. Now he's gotten tens of thousands of support from the VA, equipment, training. He's now functioning full time. Is it like some complicated chair he sits in, but he gets around. He's a functioning human being because of the VA, because he was in the ROTC for a couple of years. Right. Sure, that can perfectly well happen.
I know I'm probably being selfish with you, and your dog probably also wants you to get the heck off of this phone call.
Well, unfortunately, I have a 1 o'clock interview, I noticed.
Oh, do you? I apologize. Can I ask you just one more thing just to round it out for folks? If you could, Noam, there's, Sergio and I are 36 years old now. A lot of the people that we got involved with have went on to other things. They've moved on. They've been burnt out. They've been beat up, jailed, all kinds of things that come with this work. What's your advice to this new generation of activists and organizers? They're just getting in the street. They just got involved with the Bernie campaign. They're experiencing all of this. What's your advice for them to stay disciplined, to stay involved in the movement, and to keep up this work?
But the only advice I can think of is to tell them that they have a responsibility and a privilege that has never existed in human history. We're at a moment in human history when it will be decided whether organized life will persist on Earth, literally. That's a burden and a privilege. They have the future in their hands. There are plenty of opportunities, much better than in the past. A lot of battles have been won. The kind of thing you were struggling about in the 60s, a lot of it you don't worry about anymore. So, yes, women have rights. Yes, we can't have segregated housing by federal law. Yes, we can't have anti-sodomy laws. All of this has been won. You're starting from a higher plane because young people in the past didn't give up. Now it's your turn. You got a much better, bigger task to perform, a vastly more important one. You can do it. We have some time, not a lot of time, but just grasp the opportunities, run with them. That's the only advice I know.
Thanks for your time, Noam. I really do appreciate it.
Great to be with you, and great to know what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep in touch.
I will.
Okay, I got to get off and okay, got to find the next guy.
That's fine. You can click off whenever you want, Noam. We'll talk soon.
Okay, see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been watching Park Media. I'm your host, Vince Emanuele, today, and we'll talk to you soon. Hey, thank you for watching and listening. If you think this program is worth a pack of cigarettes or a cheeseburger, you could become a Patreon for as little as $3 a month. The link is available at our website, parkmedia.org. That's PARCmedia.org. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below. Also, you could find us on Instagram at Park Media, Facebook at Politics, Art, Roots, Culture, and you could find me on Twitter at Vince Emanuele.